With word of the president's COVID diagnosis, what are his supporters thinking about the coming election? Here's senior contributor Ted Koppel.
Election night, November 1960.
As we've reported to you earlier, we see very little probability now of any change in these figures. It seems certain that John Fitzgerald Kennedy of Massachusetts will be the next president of the United States.
Walter Cronkite may not actually have been the most trusted man in America, but he was trusted, as were his counterparts on ABC and NBC. And if they said Kennedy was the new president, well, that's the way it was.
As we go through the night and toward the dawn, counting the votes in this, one of the closest presidential elections in many, many years.
West Virginians were Democrats in those days. By 2016, this was solid Trump country.
At one time, they had more money and they knew what to do with in this county.
And McDowell County Sheriff Martin West reflected local optimism.
You really think things are going to change?
Well, I think that he can help us, yeah.
4 years later, the optimism is a little frayed, but support for Trump is undiminished.
He's done a lot for us in the last 4 years. I feel he has.
How did you react when you heard the news about the president and the first lady having COVID?
I was startled when I heard it, and my first thought really was how the Democrats is going to make fun of Trump, which they already have. MSNBC and CNN, they were already saying things that, Trump should have already known this and everything, and they're going to be making fun over the next few weeks up until the election.
In large part, it's his own dereliction is partly to blame for this. He chose to go out to rallies. He chose to downplay masks. He chose to not social distance and call it a hoax.
Good evening.
Where once television network newscasts provided a shared understanding of events, almost a social glue that held different parts of the nation together,
it is understandable. It is more than understandable to be enraged.
Cable television has turned to packaging the news according to ideological preference.
And of course, it wasn't just the media. In fact, the official message of the Democratic Party is that Donald Trump had it coming.
You're going to vote for him again?
I sure am.
Mike Lushbaugh is a former chairman of the McDowell County Republican Party in West Virginia. When we heard about the president having COVID, where did you get the news?
I got a news flash on my phone the same time that it was released to the public.
Lushbaugh doesn't get much of his news from television anymore.
You remember when, back in the older days, when newscasters presented the news in an unbiased way. They just threw it out there and let people think what they wanted to think about it. They've gotten away from the pure art of reporting, and it's just lost my interest.
Where do you get your information?
A lot of it comes from Facebook, from YouTube feeds.
Elizabeth Estep is the current chair of the McDowell County Republican Party. Her husband, Cody, is a county commissioner.
This country's tore apart bad right now. I think either way, there's going to be an uprising here. We don't want that. We do not need that in this country.
So if one of your friends said, Elizabeth, I don't know, I just can't handle Trump anymore, I'm going to vote for Biden, you just pray for him.
Well, you know what I tell him? If he satisfies God, he has to satisfy us. This has been prophesied. And if God chose him, we need to shut our mouth, the way I feel.
So you think God chose Trump to serve 2 terms?
Yes, I do.
Dusty Klein is the mother of 3. Her husband is a coal miner. She's a college grad, studied nursing. I asked her about COVID. Have people in this administration been taking it seriously enough? Now, I ask you that as a former nursing student.
I know people that have worn masks and done everything right and stayed home except for going to the grocery store, and they still ended up sick.
Do you listen to radio at all?
No.
You read newspaper?
No.
Where did you hear about the president having COVID?
I think it was on social media, Facebook maybe.
For some time now, and by the millions, people have been turning to social media platforms.
The story of the 2020 election on social media is really one of domestic partisan activity. We've seen large hyperpartisan news outlets just getting enormous numbers on social media, and they're doing it in an environment where it's a pretty loose, laissez-faire attitude toward truth, and in which this goal is just to engage people, to keep them clicking and scrolling.
Kevin Roos writes a column on technology for the New York Times.
So you have these just enormous numbers for these hyper-partisan news sources that are basically disconnected from the larger mainstream media. But I think what a lot of them have in common is that they're very skilled at provoking outrage. There's a saying that what's enraging is engaging.
Trump, of course, eventually got coronavirus.
Where once we assembled facts in order to change opinions, now
the entirety of Silicon Valley is working against Donald Trump and Republicans this year.
there is an accumulation of opinions
regarding mask wearing, which is that the evidence is somewhat mixed, given
which ultimately distort the facts.
If Trump loses, it's President Harris.
Yeah.
That, pay attention.
And you're telling me that they have more people coming to them than collectively come to ABC News, NBC News, CBS News, New York Times, Washington Post. Spell that out for me. Where are they going?
So there's a right-wing commentator named Ben Shapiro.
So again, the media's take here is that if Trump had just said the right things, if Trump had been super strict in what he said, then he wouldn't have gotten COVID.
He's very popular among conservatives. And in the last 30 days on his Facebook page, he has gotten 51.4 million interactions. That's more than 5 times as many as the New York Times. And it's more than CBS, CNN, NBC, ABC combined.
You're kind of leaving me speechless here. The president is ill, and a lot of the people that he has been with over the last few days are quite ill, and yet you're telling me that more people are getting their information from these outlets than they are from what we have traditionally looked upon as reliable news sources.
Yeah, I would say that's true, and it's part of why there is so much misinformation about things like the coronavirus. I don't think that's all social media's fault. What I do think social media has done is radically amplify those things because they are engaging, because they keep people's attention. Just saying wear a mask, it works, is a useful message and even a life-saving one, but it's not a very interesting one.
Whereas
telling people that masks are part of a conspiracy, that the government is engaging in mind control, that there's something nefarious going on. I mean, these are thriller plots. But I think ultimately the platforms ultimately have to decide whether or not they care if information is true or false.
Which would appear to lead to this sad conclusion. When we are unable to agree on what constitutes the nature of a lie, it can be all but impossible to settle on the truth.